Good morning. This is Dr. González Chacón from the University of Oviedo, and today I will be delivering a research seminar on the reception of the plays of Federico García Lorca in Irish contemporary theatre. I will explain first from McGuinness' unpublished version of The House of Bernarda Alba to illustrate my point, and will continue with Marina Carr's version of Bodas de Sangre, Blood Wedding. So to introduce the topic, I would like to address this relationship between Lorca and Irish theatre, and I would like to say that this relationship between Lorca and Irish theatre has been favored by the internationalization of Irish theatre caused by the new directions it took from the millennium, which have been noticed by scholars such as Hinton O'Toole, who announced a moment, a third revival, according to him, as a moment when theatre in Ireland left aside previous representations of conflict between tradition and modernity to start representing isolated realities which depicted their whole story. And this openness was confirmed by Llewellyn Jones when she considered an emerging Irish theatre as a representation of multiculturalism, which obviously fostered the abandonment of the close relationship between Ireland and Britain and preferred the relationship with continental drama. So Irish playwrights, in a way, used other cultures to speak of their own through, for instance, the plays of Federico García Lorca. Furthermore, the most recent accounts of contemporary theatre acknowledge this role of internationalization in the quality of the new plays. Patrick Lonergan, for instance, considers that Irish theatre, and I quote, has always been at its most distinctive when it has engaged with international rather than local concerns. And within this context, translations and adaptations of Federico García Lorca emerged in Ireland, especially from the 1980s onwards, being the plays from Lorca's rural trilogy the most often revisited. For instance, The House of Bernarda Alba was rewritten by Ida Matthews, Sebastian Barrio from McGuinness and Parker, Germa by McGuinness or Ursula Rani, and Bodas de Sangre by Diarmuid Helly, Brendan Kennelly, and most recently by Marina Carr. So starting with from McGuinness' unpublished version of The House of Bernarda Alba, we can say that this unpublished version serves to confirm that Irish playwrights have used the Spanish writer to speak to another cultures, or even through another culture, as McGuinness himself said. McGuinness was born in Buncrana in County Donegal in the Republic of Ireland, and his theatre is internationally acknowledged. He's been recognized, and I quote, as the foremost Irish playwright of his generation. And he's written 26 original plays and 22 adaptations of Greek tragedies and European plays. In this second case, he has adapted Ibsen, Chekhov, Strindberg, Pirandello, and also Spanish playwrights or dramatists such as Lorca, Valle-Inclán, or Tizón de Molina, amongst others. In this sense, he's been considered, and I quote, as one of the finest proponents of the theatrical adaptation working in the English language. McGuinness thinks of Lorca as a writer who should be a literary reference in Ireland, and the rewriting of his plays as a cultural commitment to escape the imposed English influence. Adapting Lorca would serve to understand other traditions which are close to the Irish one, but also to understand his own work as a playwright. It is useful at this point to remember that Lorca's La Casa de Bernarda Alba is the story of Porfia, Bernarda especially, and her 5 unmarried daughters, Angustias, Madalena, Amelia, Martirio, and Adela, who live asphyxiated in this family house where their mother, Bernarda, rules with a rod of iron. It is set in a rural Spanish village of the 1930s, and it evokes the suffering of women because of the socially imposed repression. Following the death of their father, all these women of the family are condemned to a long period of mourning within the walls of their house. Notwithstanding, Bernarda will not be able to avoid passions and jealousies to unfold, and the final tragedy will trigger when Adela, the youngest, refuses to conform and finally commits suicide. These themes allow to establish this relationship between the Irish and the Spanish women in the different contexts of creation and recreation, respectively. Women in Lorcan times were in Spain either idealized as willing saints and martyrs, or passionately seen as passionately wishing to devote their entire lives to their Savior God. Additionally, they were seen as a vessel, a container, and a procreating agent to be fertilized. Consequently, germination of the woman's individual personality merited no consideration. And this matches the situation of Irish women. We need to remember here the Constitution of 1936, which stated that women were expected to sacrifice for the common good of the community or the state. And they did not need to leave their homes to find a job, okay, if this implies or implied to leave aside these other commitments. So McGinnis' first contact with La Casa de Bernarda happened when he was a student, and this was in the late 1970s, and he became interested in the play. And it was the play that he first directed, actually. And after this first contact, he rewrites the play in 1991. He keeps the original plot, but adds his own flavor through, for instance, the use of language, which in his case is marked by the simplification and his attempt to reach the essence of words. In his own words, a sense of language being pushed to the limit, almost beyond the limit. Thus, the spaces for transformation that occur in this process of adaptation allow to identify some variations from the original text that point to McGinnis as a writer involved in a process of acculturation. These variations include the modernization of words that can be identified, for instance, in the initial stage directions, where the Lorcan English translation of the space as, and I quote, a great shady silence envelopes the stage, end of quote, becomes in McGinnis a gloomy silence which pervades the scene, end of quote. Other linguistic variations include the use of shorter sentences in the Irish version and the creation of a more blatant and unconcealed style through the use of informal register, used, for instance, by the character of Pomphia. Within the same fashion, the Irish playwright attempts to emphasize questions of social importance, mainly related to religion, through the insertion of some words. This is the case of expressions such as God's curse and her, which substitutes the Lorcan damned her, used in the English translation by Portia to refer to Bernarda. And McGinnis also adds some Irish words such as tor instead of beloved, or tinker, which evokes this Irish meaning of a tramp or an errant person who is somehow dislocated. As regards the themes and characters in McGinnis highlights Bernarda's violence, for instance, and extreme Catholicism, and she's portrayed as a dictator who animalizes her neighbors and evokes God's intervention to assist her. Her statement, and I quote, "Crawl back to your caves and criticize. God sent it many years before you are through my doors again," end of quote, referred to her neighbors, confirms this, since neither crawl or God were in Lorca's text. And the writing of women extends to the character of Adela, more rebellious, more passionate in McGinnis, and who revises her refusal to conform. In Lorca, this refusal was put into words in this way, I quote, "I can't be locked up. I don't want my body to dry up like yours. I don't want to waste away and grow old in these rooms." McGinnis rewrites these words in order to achieve a more determinate speech based on the repetition of "I will not." His Adela states, and I quote, "I will not be locked up. I will not let my body turn like yours. I will not lose my life in these rooms," end of quote. The Lorcan themes of family, marriage, and religion in relation to women's situation in society are equally relevant in McGuinness. Since in the Ireland of the 1990s, these issues were still of importance, so he uses the Spanish culture to talk about his own. In both plays, women's lives are marked by their lack of economic power, their consequent immobilization, a dark future of submission to their husbands and to the society's expectations, which categorizes and differentiates obligations to men and women. In McGuinness' words, needle and thread for her, whip and mule for him. As Bernardo says, women are expected to be silent within the domestic spaces where they must stay, and of course, they do not have agency. I quote again, even your eyes don't belong to you, they say. This depiction can be linked to the figure of the Derby Mother, which existed in the Belfast of the 1990s as a contemporary representation of Mother Ireland who embraces martyrdom as a necessary sacrifice for the common good. This concept was defined by sociologists as a strong, silent woman who exerted an influence on families and for whom martyrdom was a worthy goal. The figure was identified in Belfast, as we said, where McGuinness' version was first released, and it was attached to this identification of a matrilineage, which highlighted the role of women and at the same time the obstruction of their independence by, for instance, the importance of religion or the notions of decorum that this demanded. Other thematic coincidences which result valid in both contexts include the lack of female solidarity derived from the lack of individual freedom, the depiction of the institution of marriage as controversial, considering the social debate in Northern Ireland about abortion and divorce, or the role of inquisitive communities who watch behind the curtains in Lorca and which evoke the atmosphere again of Northern Ireland, where the troubles and sectarian division caused serious social mistrust and suspicion. All with this intention of speaking about a culture through another culture, a more recent version of Lorca's works in Ireland has been Marina Cart's Blood Wedding, a version of Bodas de Sangre, which was first produced in 2019. Marina Carr has been recognized as the most significant and successful Irish playwright since Lady Gregory. She has written versions and adaptations of Greek tragedies, adapting myths in her early plays, in The May, Portia Kaufman, By the Book of Cats, which echo the myths of Electra, Antigone, Medea. Creating characters that cannot escape the dramatic action of a theatre, and I quote, where emotions are utterly intense and scary, yet driven by a detailed, impulsive obligation to establish the strong connections between cause and effects, where things are named for what they are. So again, we can identify this intention of speaking the unspeakable. Marina Carr's works from the millennium have continued showing this interest towards the use of Greek tragedy to represent the situation of women in society, and her use of myth has been addressed as the creation of spaces for imagination and transformation. This can be seen in Ariel, Phaedra Backwards, Hecuba, but this intention can also be identified in Marina Carr's rewritings of international playwrights. For instance, in 16 Possible Glimpses, where she imagines the life and death of Chekhov, in Anna Karenina, her stage adaptation of Tolstoy's novel, and most recently in Blood Wedding, where she turns to Lorca again. That wedding was premiered at the Young Big Theatre in London in September 2019, and the play is located in rural Ireland. But the setting is described as a fluid space to encapsulate, I think, the permeability and universality of the themes depicted, and to evoke this liminal space that frames the events that happened then and now, always. Through this play, Carr joins the work of Irish playwrights involved in the rewriting of Lorca's theatre, putting into words what the Spanish playwright had only suggested, giving voice to the silences of the original play. So Marina Carr is writing Bodas de Sangre, which is the story of two lovers bride and Leonardo, who have to face the opposition of their families and community, represented in the characters of mother and groom, which had expectations of an arranged marriage and a life of sacrifice for them, and who will end up involved in a violent tragedy when they refuse to conform. Carr preserves the Lorcan themes, but emphasizes some of them, such as the role of religion, society, violence, desire, and mainly the effects of all this in women. Religion's overwhelming presence in society is described in the stage directions, where a link is established with violence to suggest the resulting dark and gloomy atmosphere. I quote, "Mother stands before a huge, garbage-tormented, crucified Christ, blood and nails and crown of thorns, expression of agony on his face. She holds a knife to his throat," end of quote. To add to the picture, Carr eliminates some festive decorations in Lorca's play. For instance, in The Bride's House, in the Spanish play, a cave where there was a cross of pink flowers and pink bows and laces adorning the archway doors. These elements have been turned into, I quote, "a cave house built into the mountain," end of quote, to symbolize not only the rural character, but also the obscurity and lack of adornments of the place. Within this context, desires cannot be attained, especially for women, since their longing for passion is regarded as an unnatural concern. Violence and desire are linked very early in Carr's Black Wedding. This can be seen in the character of Mother, for instance, when she described the power of a knife to destroy human flesh in these terms. I quote, "You know the power of a knife? You ever pack a knife bound with salt, stuff the guts back into the stomach cave? You ever see a man slit from its throat to his rabbits?" End of quote. And continues to ask his son for revenge, which was a wish that was hidden in Lorca. Here, a mother openly states, "I want you to kill all of them." Related to this, forgiveness is presented as unthinkable, and the effects in women bring the lack of female solidarity, which is also reworked by Carr, depicting a mother who has lost any caring trait. While in Lorca, she was at first suspicious of Bride, but had an initial positive opinion about her as a chaste woman who conformed to the stereotypes of a good wife. The Irish mother now shows an intense hatred and instant jealousy. I quote, "I can't stomach the thought of her sucking the life out of you, filthy hands all over you. Why should I part with you when I'm the one that made you?" End of quote. With the same intention of writing forward Lorca, the reconfiguration of the language serves to reach the essential meanings. Although Carr preserves the musical nature of Lorca's works, the poetic language is rewritten into her own style, characterized this time by her intention to translate Lorca's symbols and metaphors into real images which depict pain and suffering, the pain and suffering of the action. The songs used by Lorca echo the Greek choruses and involve creating an illusion of fate and destiny, of necessariness, the suggestion that men and women are at the mercy of elemental forces which shape their lives in which they barely comprehend. Carr preserves this intention, this meaning, but transforms Lorca's lyrical songs into poems that announce loss and agony. This can be seen, for instance, in the songs of The Wedding Day. The moon reworks the traditional and cheerful Spanish wedding song used to depict the rural customs. The scene where Leonardo and Bride first meet is evoked differently. There is no love in flower or jasmine in the bride's forehead, or dance and ribbons of gold at the wedding, as it happened in Lorca. This has been or have been transformed in Carr's landscapes of sorrow into a wedding dress which is described as a prison for a bride who has now terror in her eyes. and who has become, in Carr's words, the Virgin of Sorrows, or the Venus, of the Mantilla shawl. This construction of characters served to identify other spaces of transformation. For instance, Carr gives voice to Lorca himself, first through a reference to his unresolved death. I quote, "They say there is a poet buried under this tree, but they never found him." End of quote. And then Marina Carr adds this ode to denounce the injustice of Lorca's death. I quote, "I am your poet of the night," he said, "pay me in silver." They did. Silver bullets, silver knives, silver death. I saw him once at dawn coming home from love and wine, music and perfume, the jeweled tongue. Carried away in this labyrinth of blood, his voice a task of nightingales. They called him the queer with the bow tie, cut his wings off. He always knew they would. End of quote. Additionally, Marina Carr excludes some secondary characters, such as Leonardo's mother, or the neighbor, or death, to focus instead on the story on the major characters and add new characters. For instance, the weaver, a character that can be identified with other spiritual figures of her theatre, such as the ghost fancier in By the Book of Cats or Grandma Fireclan in The Main. These are characters that somehow highlight and conduct the core of the action, foresee or round off the events of the play, and are usually related to the supernatural. The weaver here is a symbol of death and pain coming from, and I quote, "beyond the beyond," living, and I quote, "at her loom, weaving the red entrails." She represents ancient wisdom and worldliness and positions the village in an unholy place, or in her own words, I quote, "a God-forsaken hole of the fallen world." Moreover, she weaves the background lives of the characters that Lorca had left to the imagination of the reader, especially women. This is the case of Bride's mother, who in Lorca was, I quote, "beautiful, but she didn't love her husband." While for the weaver, she is a woman, or she was a woman, and I quote, "proud as Lucifer, no good to her husband, too busy with everyone else's husbands," she adds. This same intention of reconstructing women's lost stories is achieved through the character of La Manchita, whose name could be translated as the Little Stain, and who is in the play a Moor or a bride's ancestor who epitomizes these women's genealogies, which appear also very often in Marina Carr's theatre, who suffered the same exclusion in this case as Bride did in the Lorcan text. La Manchita gives voice to women's silences and puts into words their long suffering caused by the exclusion and rejection that they suffered, and that caused, in many cases, their deaths. La Manchita's gypsy condition and lust marks her difference and anticipates Bride's misbehavior, described as the very one, 20 children from 20 different men, the gypsy tongue. Her character serves to construct the gypsy Irish ambience in Carr's version, and thus to connect again Marina Carr and Lorca, since the Spanish playwright was considered, and I quote, as a poet of the Andalusian Spanish people and the gypsy poet, end of quote. Although La Manchita is sustained and represents paralyzed women marked by the eternal repetition of their fates, Carr does leave a space for the redefinition of the role of women in society through her reconfiguration of some other characters. This is the case of Leonardo's wife, a weak and suffering woman in Lorca, who cries when she's reminded about her husband's relationship with Bride, and suffers because her own mother does not support her. In Carr, wife is much stronger, does not have a cruel mother, and is given the chance to tell her own story. She's not any longer naive and demands her rights. "I'm the one should be up on your white horse," she says to her husband. Her original Lorcan's application, "don't leave me this way not knowing anything," is rewritten into a statement where she redefines masculinity, using the same arguments traditionally argued to depreciate women. And within this same fashion, Bride has stopped being a woman that knows how to cook and never talks, okay, to gain agency and the opportunity to justify her rebellious behavior. To achieve this, Marina Carr adds lines to clarify accusations of her. For instance, Mother's reference to Bride and Leonardo's previous affair, and Father's promise that this was not true. Even though she appears on the stage wearing a veil over her face, she reveals early her strength in her encounters with Mother through statements like, and I quote, "I'm not a heifer at the mud," when Mother tries to examine her as if she was an animal. Furthermore, she denounces women's lack of solidarity, and rather than trying to hide Leonardo's secret visits to her, she openly confesses them, and she states, "Downright, it wasn't my groom." In addition, she redefines what marriage should be, not an arrangement as everybody else considers, but a passionate union of two lovers. The Lorcan lines where she tried to conceal her inner thoughts and feelings have been omitted in Carr's version to be substituted by outbreaks of sincerity linked to the denounce of women's unfair situation. I quote, "We are savages when it comes to the book of love around here. Bitter as the slow when we look at the men, and when the man looks at us, women, it's only to use us or destroy us or see what they can get out of us for nothing." End of quote. So this contextual information that Marina Carr adds allows the reader to understand the character of Bride much better, and she's also constructed through references to her mother's life, transformed from brief suggestions that she wasted her life in the village in Lorca to the depiction now of a woman longing for exotic spaces and landscapes, which makes Bride notice the boundaries of her limited existence. I quote Bride again, "My mother used to talk about the sea, oaks the size of houses, all that moon-filled water. Is this all I am allowed? This narrow portion, this mountain, this groom?" End of quote. In addition, she has lost the Lorcan sacrificial tone and declares to Leonardo, "I am not dying for you." Leonardo's history is also written backwards. He destroys any chance of romantic love when he states, "We are not in a fairy tale," and unveils his real motivations. The Gracias had done something to his sister in the past, and he's looking now for revenge through his relationship with Bride. So it is not, as we said before, a case of romantic love. The first encounter is marked in the Irish version by another act of speaking the unspeakable that Marina Carr constructs. In this case, this consists in their confession of their damaging passion, Leonardo's depiction of her marital life as a nightmare that makes him write at nights to escape, and his prediction of the impending tragedy announced by the landscapes of sorrow. After the lovers escape on the wedding day, the secondary characters, such as the woodcutters, play the role in Marina Carr, and in this case, they demand the right of the couple to leave their love. Marina Carr adds what she calls a final scene, where Lorcan's mother is written forward to announce that she feels now calm. "My 3 men safe in their beds at last. No more fear to the night, no more waiting at windows and doors till the small hours for their step or their voices." End of quote. Also, Bride writes her character forward to explain what was really behind her love affair with Leonardo. "It wasn't me Leonardo wanted, it was your son." Her final proud recognition of La Manchita as her ancestor serves to construct her refusal to admit that she has been defeated and to acknowledge the value of the silenced women's voices before her. I quote, "Cross me out, my mother's blood singing in my veins. La Mencita singing in my blood, all the women I come from singing from their graves, singing of horsemen and love, galloping wide and free under windy stars and wolf-blood moons, galloping with their dark riders on their pale horses of doom. End of quote. So to conclude, we could say that this relationship between Lorca and Ireland has been bi-directional. Echoes of Synge and Yates have been perceived in Lorca's plays, especially as regards the poetic depiction of rural life. But also the Irish interest in Lorca's theatre has emerged from the 1980s to speak through Lorca about their own culture. And as can be seen, the two examples that we have seen today, this unpublished version by Fran McGuinness and this rewriting of Bodas de Sangre by Marina Carr. So for McGuinness, Lorca should be considered as a reference in Ireland, and he rewrites the House of Bernard Alba through the use of a language which intends to reach the essence of words, the adaptation of themes, especially the themes of violence and extreme Catholicism, and the rewriting of women characters, especially Adela. On the other side, Marina Carr's Blood Wedding is the latest contribution to this canon of Irish versions and adaptations of Lorca's plays, and the analysis of the language, themes, and characters allowed to conclude that the playwright intended to name themes for what they are, and also to speak the unspeakable. Giving voice to the Spanish playwright's symbolic silences. So to the importance of the theme of violence and religion, Carr adds the blatant depiction of desire as the main emotion that triggers the action, linked to violence, and within her intention of writing Lorca forward, the Irish playwright rewrites the poetic songs of the original play into dark poems that depict pain and suffering. Carr's variations include also the addition of characters such as Lorca himself, the weaver, or La Mencita, to represent women's genealogies excluded and discriminated during generations in both cultures. And the final slide, in this final slide, I have included two examples of bibliography related to the topic. The first article that you can see there is about another unpublished version of Federico García Lorca by Irish playwrights, in this case written by Lynn Parker. The second one is the article that I wrote in 2019 about Fran McGuinness' version of Lorca's The House of Bernard Alba. And as possibility for further research, of course, I suggest to continue with this study of unpublished versions of Lorca's plays in Ireland. I have included there some examples, in this case 3 manuscripts that remain unpublished. The versions of The House of Bernard Alba by Sebastian Barry and Aidan Matthews, and another version of Blood Wedding by Dermot Healy. And you can find further information, of course, about all these unpublished versions at irishplayography.com, which is, as you know, the most important website about Irish theatre. Thank you very much.